And so at the heart of innovation, I think one of the first things you got to do is you got to break down team silos and break down data silos. So your teams are working together around common goals. Your data's connected. You're looking at a similar set of KPIs that everybody agrees these are the things we're going after together. And unless you can do that, everything else is going to be tough because you don't even know what winning looks like, you know.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Social Impact Solutions podcast, where we help nonprofits measure and market their social impact. I'm Mark Vanderpool, one of the co-founders of Social Impact Solutions, but today you're in for a real treat with a special guest, Gabe Cooper. Gabe Cooper is the founder and CEO of Virtuous CRM. This is one of the top nonprofit CRMs for organizations who are actively trying to grow their revenue and professionalize their nonprofit. Gabe has extensive experience working with nonprofits. Virtuous CRM is already 10 years old. And before that, he worked as a software developer and worked alongside a lot of really, really important, impactful nonprofits. Something else that I really think is important to hit on in this conversation is Gabe talks about innovation in two very, very distinct ways. He talks about how nonprofits can become more innovative, obviously by applying technology like Virtuous to their CRM, but just as importantly, he talks about how can nonprofits innovate by managing people differently. Gabe actually wrote a great book called The Responsive Nonprofit that came out a few months ago, and I strongly recommend the book. And I think it is just as much a treatise on how nonprofits can lead and manage their teams differently, while at the same time, how they can leverage innovation through technology to take their organization to the next level. Let's go ahead and dive straight into the podcast. You're in for a real treat. Gabe Cooper, thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John. This is awesome. I such a huge fan of yours and everything you guys are doing at Social Impact. But we talked about this before we jumped on. I feel like I've been stalking you on social media for a while just because everything you post seems so brilliant. But yeah, honored to be here.
Well, it's very kind of you to say. Obviously, would say the exact same thing. We have a lot that we want to talk about, but really would love to start, tech guy through and through. What made you want to take and apply everything that you know about technology and apply it to the nonprofit space? I would love to hear a little bit more about your journey as to how you arrived to being the CEO of Virtuous.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to go way back. There's not a therapy session, but I think, at a very high level, learned the power of generosity from my folks. Both of my parents were incredibly generous people. And as I got into my career, got a little bit sort of disenfranchised in a way as a software developer because there just wasn't sort of very much meaning, and was surrounded by a few amazing folks that just really talked a lot about the power of generosity. And so that inspired me. I talk about this a lot. It's actually baked into the mission of Virtuous, which is, generosity has this amazing power to change the world. The thing that we all see, which is you give a gift of money to an anti-human trafficking organization and you're helping fight against human trafficking. That's amazing. But the other part of it for me that was almost more meaningful is when people give away their time or money, it makes them less focused on themselves. I feel like we live in a world that's massively selfish right now, right? And people are all about their own thing. But people that are generous are typically not that way. They're really focused on their neighbor, and less on their own deal. And so for me, I worked in tech for a long time. I worked at a nonprofit for a while, and then I ran an agency that served the nonprofit space for years. And so developed a lot of sort of pattern recognition in the nonprofit space, but thought, man, what a better way to use the skills sort of God has given me to be able to make an impact in the world than to try to inspire more generosity.
That's such a great point, because you really, when we talk about what are the different levers that you can pull to unlock generosity, right? You have to know those psychological movers, but at the same time, your mission behind it was there's so much opportunity to unlock. It's how do you pinpoint what those needs are? But the end result, like you're saying, the more generous people are, we stop looking inward, we finally start looking outward. We have a whole new outlook on life. What would you say though, just again, not a therapy session, but growing up, what did you see with people that were more generous than those that were less, and what their quality of life was like?
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, I think there's a few markers that are pretty easy to see. One is that um, people are sort of less protective and less worried about their own comfort. I think particularly in America,
Mhm.
I love our rugged independence as a country, but how that ends up translating is, you know, it gets covered over by consumerism, and so people are always worried about like, am I going to be okay? Like, am I comfortable and am I safe? Right.
Mm.
And once you start giving stuff away, giving away your time, you start worrying less about, am I comfortable and am I safe? And start worrying more about, so what that produces is people are typically more joyful. Like they're sort of having more fun, right?
Mhm.
They're like less worried about their own deal and protecting their stuff. They tend to be a lot more humble because they start realizing their own stuff doesn't matter quite as much, and just, you know, generally better to be around. You always, in the latest round of sort of political debates, no matter what side of the aisle you sit on, the more generous people on either side of the aisle tend to like walk into those conversations a little less sort of fired up and a little bit more humble and a little bit more ready to learn, right? It manifests itself in all kinds of fun ways.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's amazing. Like the walls come down, like these
Yeah.
these actual walls of like us versus them. Like it goes completely out the window. Yeah,
Yeah.
we love seeing that. And when you have an understanding of how whether it's the rest of the world or the rest of your city, like how other people live, just having that gratitude, but knowing that you can be a contributor to the success of other people or to the impact of other
Yes.
people is so exciting.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
great. And
100%
people
agree.
want to be generous too. And so like that's the other thing. Like we talk about this with other people in development. It's like, oh, I don't want to ask people for money. People want to make a difference. People want to make an impact. It is a wonderful innate human need that when you unlock that, when you give them the opportunity to be more generous, it's a very different world that we can create. It's really cool that you built a platform, a tech platform that enabled that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a quote, we use this all the time. Eglantine Jeb is a really old quote, but basically the paraphrase of it is like, people aren't ungenerous; they're just distracted, right?
Right.
Like people
Right.
want to give and make a difference. You just get surrounded, and man, like that. I think that quote was from maybe the early 1900s. Well, you play
That's
that
great.
forward to 2024, we're surrounded by thousands of ad messages a day, like
Right.
infinitely scrolling Instagram, really buying for our attention, like crazy filled email inboxes, kids
Right.
sports. It's like our lives are so crowded that
Right.
it's not that we're ungenerous, we're just distracted, right? And
Mm.
so that's like for the nonprofits that I serve, that really is the thing, right? Like how do you break through with stats and stories and compelling impact, and then help them understand how they can easily step into being shoulder to shoulder with you, close to the cause. And when you can do that, it's a gift. Yeah, the job that fundraisers get to do, it's like you are giving a gift to the people that you're inviting into that story.
I could not agree with that more. I could not agree with more because it really is that gift of generosity. And the more we can understand, we're facilitating the gift, facilitating the transaction, the stewardship of that gift. I feel like that's what I'm going to brag on your book because I really enjoyed reading The Responsive Nonprofit. Really enjoyed writing about it, posting about it, and letting more people know that you really took a lot of the most innovative practices out of different sectors. Like you took it out of change management, obviously from technology, took it from the Valley, from Silicon Valley, and said, how can we take these best practices and bring it to the social sector? And what's so fun, and this is why our company is dedicated to the social sector, is that nonprofits solve problems that businesses aren't designed to solve.
That's right.
Some government programs aren't designed to solve these things. There's obviously different use cases of that. But when you take the best of what works and apply it to a sector that is
Yeah.
going to solve unsolvable problems like non-business use cases, it's super exciting. And I would just love to know, why would you put the energy and effort into writing a book, number one, but into writing this kind of book? Like, why did you think it was so important?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things is I've seen, you look at companies that are truly innovative and they scale, and yeah, you can look at sort of tech companies, whether it's, Palantir or Meta or whatever, pick your tech company that's scaled, and there's just stuff about scale, but also like one of the examples I use a lot is Disney. Like, we
Mm-hmm.
don't think about them as an innovation juggernaut, but really, like in the early days, especially, Disney is just this innovation juggernaut, right? And so I think that the folks that our nonprofits are serving deserve that level of innovation. We're in a world that's changing really fast, and there's a massive danger in becoming irrelevant and ineffective really fast unless you're able to keep up with the pace of change. And so for me, it's I've sat in this like world with my leg and one leg in one side and one leg in the other side. And I thought, man, so many of these principles apply so well. And I want so badly for the nonprofits we serve to be able to adopt these to move faster and create more good in the world. The other thing too is like, there's this weird sort of disincentive that exists or misaligned incentive that exists in the nonprofit space where Nike, uh, if they sell shoes that aren't good, people don't buy those shoes, and they have to change really fast
Mm-hmm.
to be able to produce shoes that people will buy. In the nonprofit space, there's more of a lag because sometimes the people getting the money and the time aren't the people giving the money and the time, right? And so you can sort of go for a long period of time before you realize, oh, the thing we're doing isn't actually serving our community or accomplishing our mission. And it creates this incentive to sort of not change because I'm not feeling the pain of not changing quite as
Mm-hmm.
fast. And so it ends up nonprofits die and become effective as like a death by 1,000 cuts, just like institutional inertia sets in, things begin to calcify, right? And like that's the last thing that we need. We need like you said, the nonprofit sector solving problems that no other sector can solve. Like we need nonprofits to be successful, and so we need them to innovate. And so my hope was that I could at least, it may be a drop in the bucket, but I could at least contribute a little bit to that mission.
No, it's so good. No, you contributed a lot with that. So I love that use case of just looking at Nike. Yeah, let's just say they spend X million dollars, whatever they're spending on product development. It's a lot, right? You know better than I do. All of this time, all of this research, all of this effort, energy, and effort, then they finally go to market, and it's a complete bomb, right? They have this feedback loop that is so tight that it's like, oh, devastation, and so they have to iterate and improve so quickly. To your point, you look at needs assessments typically, and then we love performing needs assessments for nonprofits because they know, okay, what do the people we serve actually need? Like, what is the actual thing that they need at the time? So it's research, it's interviews, it's surveys, it's a lot of data collection. The typical needs assessment feedback loop is 3 years, and that's for organizations that are taking it seriously. It's like, it's a really, really long feedback loop. Like you as a CEO of a tech company, what if it was like, hey, we'll let you know how this product rollout is in 36 months?
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
And I mean, your point, like if Nike has a massive failure, there's no such thing as sunk cost. They just pull the plug and iterate to the next thing right away. And it's funny in the book, there's a chapter in there about like human-centered design, right? Which is basically, it comes out of Stanford, but it's basically the idea that all of your decision making should sort of be bottoms up. So you should be in your community, talking to them, being amazingly curious, asking questions, and that should drive sort of your innovation curve and the services you're delivering. It should drive program, it should drive fundraising, is that sort of like bottoms up empathy and curiosity. But the trick there is what you said is, how do you do that faster, right? Like, how do you find out in the next 2 weeks what the people really think and what they feel? And then the 2 weeks after that, how do you test whether that's right? And the 2 weeks after that, how do you get into the practices of your organization? That super short cycles is where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah, you're one. And actually, going to go ahead and I'm looking at the quote that you had on that topic. Your organization, I've got to go back up one. Organizations that start with their constituents and work backwards find solutions faster. That was the quote from your book on that section. I had that highlighted, underlined, and I was like, this guy's amazing. And so just thinking, it's that rate of change. And I think nonprofits can hear this and be like, this sounds devastating. This sounds terrifying. Like we're talking about Nike level innovation, or you were talking about IDEO out of Stanford. IDEO level, Stanford D school, like the D lab that they have up there, design lab, that quick of innovation we don't even have the resources to pay our team members what they're worth,
Yep.
right? We don't have the resources to meet our fundraising goals. We don't have the resources to implement a tech overhaul. So what I think you did such a great job of in this book is you gave all of these different playbooks. You're like, hey, this is not an all at once thing. Like, this is a let's focus and improve, focus and improve. And I think one of the most exciting ones that you talked about is if there's anything that we run into on a daily basis, it's silos. It's like, whoa, we just hit a silo so hard, I've got a concussion, that kind of a situation. So would you mind defining like organizational silos and what that looks like for a typical organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to step back to something you just said. It's like the, um, feeling overwhelmed by everything. Cause when I talk about silos, that's going to come up. But, um, and people are so sick of me hearing me say this at this point, but my favorite quote for the last couple of years is from the movie Frozen 2, because I have a 10-year-old daughter and I've had to watch that movie a lot of times. But it's just do the next right thing, right?
Yeah.
And so you don't actually have to do all of this stuff all at the same time. Just commit to doing the next right thing, right? And so you're right. In this book, there's a bunch of playbooks you can run. Like, pick one, like start somewhere, whichever one resonates the most and feels like the most pain. Let's just test it. Don't like go to your board and get approval and plan to test it in next year's annual plan. Just like find 2 people at your organization who are brave enough to try the thing, right? Like, just start really small and don't get stuck. And so I say that because that's going to be key to any of this stuff. It feels like boiling the ocean otherwise, and it's just too hard.
Such a good point.
Yeah. On silos, yeah, what I've noticed a lot, and I tell the story in the book, the place that my wife first worked early in her career. She's working as a program manager at a shelter running their family program. And she's complaining that, the fundraising executive team felt so disconnected from the needs of the folks that they were serving. And I said, well, like, what did they have? What did they have to say about that when you talk to them? She's like, I don't know. I've never met any of them. What do you mean you've never met any of them? It's like, they work in a building on the other side of the parking lot, and they never walk over to our side of where the program runs.
Okay.
I'm like, it was such, in my mind, just in the early days of my career, this physical representation of like, man, that does not feel right. Like that feels ineffective. Right. And I think that happens in nonprofits a lot, especially as they grow, where just silos start developing between the teams and between your sets of data. And so with the teams, the first one is typically the fundraising team, which is a lot of nonprofits, people on the program side got into it for reasons of the cause. And they often see the fundraising team as like, it's the dirty salesy work of getting money for the actual work of the cause, and not realizing that generosity itself is actually part and parcel to the cause. It's part of the value and the good that your organization is delivering to the world. So you just start seeing this sort of silo build up between program and fundraising, and then finance and IT is like, man, IT is a bottleneck for everything. There's some guy, this is another room we don't know, and he's just slowing stuff down, right? And then you get a silo that builds up there, and then another one, and then people start buying different systems to get the job done, which I actually like the idea of teams being able to pick their own software and use the tools they need to succeed. But the side effect of that is, gosh, we have this all the time where, major donor shows up to volunteer 5 times over the course of the year. Volunteer team has no idea that's a major donor, and the major gift team has no idea their person just showed up to volunteer, right? Because this is like completely disconnected data sets. And then there's silos between those teams. So those teams aren't talking on a weekly basis. Their data isn't talking. And then as a result, you have a ton of inefficiencies and wasted time, but the experience of donors, your constituents, feels very disconnected and disjointed as well, because now the volunteer team is sending them something that's completely disconnected from the appeal they just got in the mail, is completely disconnected from the major gift conversation they're having. And it just feels really, really choppy, right? And so at the heart of innovation, I think one of the first things you got to do is you got to break down team silos and break down data silos. So your teams are working together around common goals. your data's connected, you're looking at a similar set of KPIs that everybody agrees these are the things we're going after together. And unless you can do that, everything else is going to be tough because you don't even know what winning looks like,
You literally cannot get out of it. You can't get out of the silos unless you intentionally break them down. I mean, we've had so many similar instances when we're trying to do, measure the impact of a program. And let's say it's a multi-country nonprofit. They're in 25 different countries. They're collecting different types of impact data. Let's say it's from like a medical clinic. And they're in so many different villages, and like they're gathering some data over here, a little data over there. But then, they have a VIP team where their major foundation is going to show up and volunteer, and the people on the ground have no idea who these people are, and they kick them out.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
stuff like this happens all of the time. And they're nightmare situations. I mean, it's a complete nightmare scenario for the nonprofit. And just saying, what would need to be true in order for that not to be the case? And I love asking that kind of a question. And you have this phrase, I think I want people to tattoo it on their arm, like the kind of an idea of just hire hackers, not craftsmen.
Mm.
And so this is a stage of professionalization. Like if a nonprofit's going through this, like we're professionalizing the organization. And would you say it's fair that they can be led to believe, well, if we're going to professionalize, then we need to replicate some monolith of a company from their IT department, and we want to adopt those same practices. So like if we're a $40 million nonprofit, let's look to one that's doing $1 billion a year and just copy what they're doing.
Yeah.
Tell me why that is right or wrong or ineffective or ineffective.
Yeah. I mean, you see this all the time, nonprofits, and this isn't always bad. The person I'm about to describe, I've met a lot of them, and only about half of them fit the mold of what I'm about to say. Half of them are like amazing. So I don't want to stereotype too much here, but there's a tendency to hire, somebody that came out of industry, some big company in like a middle management job, was retired for 6 years, wanted to do good in the world, and thought, man, it'll be easy. I can coast my retirement. I'll just get a job at a nonprofit.
Shots fired.
Right. Yeah. And so like, and again, some of those people are like, they still have the energy and they're still scrappy and they get in and do the work. Right. But a lot of times it just creates like this, like nothing's changing, nothing's moving fast. I think one of the best ways I've heard this described is stolen from a software guy named Jason Limpkin, but we use it at Virtuous a lot, which is, we hire pirates and romantics. So if you could see the back of my laptop right now, I have like a pirate skull and crossbones on there.
Love it.
And the meaning of that is just like, we hire people that have a chip on their shoulder, right? And they're scrappy. Like they are not okay with the status quo, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have this desire to do better every single day, and they're super curious, right? Like as a nonprofit, you want people with a chip on their shoulder that are super curious, right? Like you shouldn't be having to go to your whole organization and saying, hey, who's heard of AI? Like you should have people that are like way out ahead of you. So when you go to them, he's like, yeah, I just used AI to analyze all of our program outcome data and learn these 4 insights because like, I'm just trying to try stuff, right? Like you need that level of scrappy. And yeah, there's danger in that. Like it feels a little bit chaotic, but I'm just telling you, it's way easier to tell somebody to slow down than it is to tell somebody to speed up.
You're preaching now. That's so good. That's such a good takeaway right there.
Yeah.
But it requires so much energy, right? Because they're having to break through these silos themselves. Like they're literally grabbing a sledgehammer and trying to bust through these silos. And it's not fast. Like it's not quick.
Not fast.
It's not easy.
No.
And so like you need that pirate to come in and say, we're going to solve this problem come hell or high water.
That's right. Yeah.
So important.
That's right. Yeah. And just go out and do it, not form a committee and come up with a year plan, but just like, hey, what in the next 2 weeks, what can we do to like show some results here?
I love that.
And
you have 2 weeks.
That level of scrappiness, I think, is great.
But you can wind up like you've been around. How many sprints has Virtuous done, in the last 5 years? Like literally think about how many sprints and like thinking about what kind of organizational trajectory that creates versus business as usual.
Yeah. That's a really interesting question. So like, in the last 5 years, we've done 125 sprints, but we use it for innovation, but we use it on our marketing team as well.
Love
But
it.
yeah, it creates learning. So we, in the book I talk about Agile and doing things in a 2-week sprint. But the magic of that is you're breaking up work, and so you have clearly defined results every 2 weeks. But it also
Mhm.
creates this like environment where people have to like show and tell their work. And so, you don't go like 6 months without knowing what somebody's working on. There's like high accountability, really close feedback loops because people are expected to sort of show their work
Mhm.
every 2 weeks. But the best part of it's maybe like the retrospective, where at the end of the 2 weeks, everybody says like, "Hey, here's what I learned. Remember we were going to try this, like we're going to try to run Facebook ads for the first time, and we thought this message would really resonate, and like we did that, and boy were we wrong, but here's the thing we learned," right? And so you just get you learn so fast, like
Mhm.
with that attitude. The hard part, and I mentioned this in the book, is so much in nonprofits done in like annual plans, right? Like you say these are the things that we're going to do this year. The board approved those things, and so the hard part's actually kind of at the executive level is calibrating the leadership team and your board that um, we don't know everything. We're
Mhm.
going to learn. We're going
Right.
to allocate budget and give ourselves permission to change as we go. Now we'll keep you looped in on that, but that you just sort of admit, and part of that's just being willing to admit failure and that you don't know everything, right?
Right.
But like if you can lean into that and get permission to change when you figure out what's working and what's not, like it's super powerful.
It's just Zuckerberg has the whole move fast and break things, and obviously
Yep.
there's a place for that. But just thinking like, what's on the other end of this, right? So
Mhm.
it boils down to like resource allocation.
Yep.
How much resources do we have, and what do we expect to get out of that? And then testing it.
Mhm.
And I can look back in just the last 6 months and see how many tests that I tried that fell on its face so
Yes.
marvelously. It was just like the
Mhm.
best flop you could ever imagine. You're like, oh, we learned a lot. We learned a
Yes.
lot by doing that. And so it's like, great, let's not do that again. Let's do this instead. Rather
Yeah.
than, hey, I wonder if that'll work. And then you never test it out. And years can go by and you
Yeah.
never iterate and improve.
Yeah. I think the other part of that is because of some of the data problems and goal setting problems that
Mhm.
you see often at nonprofits, that you don't know what winning looks like.
Right.
You're maybe willing to try the thing, but you don't quite know if it worked, right? And so, you know, if I walk into it, like for me, donor retention, particularly first to second gift donor retention, like can you
Mhm.
get somebody from that first gift to the second gift? That becomes like the number that
Right.
sustainability and resiliency of your organization sort of hangs on that number.
Right.
Like if I walked into 20 nonprofits today and said, "What's your first to second gift retention?" Like maybe like Tim in accounting that runs the database could get you that number a few weeks from now, but nobody else knows it. And so when you're working on a new email campaign
Mhm.
and you don't know, like when you ran that campaign, like you don't know that number. Even if you did know it, you don't know if you trust that number. Like, how do I know if I'm winning? Right. And
Exactly.
so I think that's the thing is so many, like when you don't have a number, what you end up doing is you give high fives when a project is complete. Like we
That's
said,
a
we
good
were going to do the project, so we did the project, but you don't actually know if the project got you anywhere. If you align around a number, we're going to bring up donor retention by 10% in the next 6 months. Now, the project can ebb and flow, right? It's like you try one little project, it doesn't work, you're just going to try another little project because you're focused on that number. You're focused on the results and not the activity, right?
Such a good point. That's such a good point. Focusing on the result and not the activity. That is not the DNA of most organizations. And so thinking about the shift that's required in order for that to happen, when we really like, okay, we have to know our data, right? First and foremost, we have to know our data. And so with what you built with Virtuous, it's like you took a best in class CRM, but you're like, let's not stop there. let's find what are the primary drivers for nonprofit growth success specific to revenue. So we'll talk about this from a fundraising dollars and cents standpoint. And so knowing what your second time gift is, like that drop off rate. I think the most recent report that came out was that donor churn is like 65 or 72% for nonprofits. Thinking about how devastating that is, how could you possibly grow a business if you had 70% churn?
Yeah.
Impossible.
And keeping your existing ones is so much cheaper than acquiring new ones, but it's like, but it's hard. It's hard to know the number and know what activity I need to do to impact the number, right? So,
right.
Yeah. And by the way, there are great organizations doing some of this stuff really well. I feel like on some of these things, like I'll be like, why don't nonprofits get it? The reality is we work with some people. There's even people that don't work with Virtuous that I know that I'm like, you're killing it. But when the organizations I see doing this stuff well are like growing like gangbusters and having a massive impact in the world, which is a ton of fun.
They're the ones that when you look at their 990s, they've got this enormous surplus of capital. Like that they have so much cash between revenue collected and expenses. I was looking at one the other day and they had 30% margins. 30%. And you never see that in the nonprofit space. It's just like, what are you guys doing? And you find out they're focusing on these things. Like we're having the same conversation. And it's, our churn rate's 15% or it's 5%. And they're looking at a totally different conversation when it comes to fundraising.
Yeah. 100%, especially around donor retention. That's absolutely true. And what that does is it's super predictable. A lot of the people even listening now have causes that aren't going to get solved in the next year, right? They're like, this is a 20-year problem. And so you need to have predictable, sustainable revenue to accomplish your mission for the next 20 years. Well, so much of that just comes down to retention, right? And not like the mad scramble where, at the point this podcast is being recorded, we're coming up on the end of the year and so many orgs will get, 60% of their giving in the next 13 days, right? And like, man, that is, as a fundraiser, that's just real stressful to not know, right? It's so stressful. Like it's funny, I'm the fundraising committee of the board of a nonprofit I'm on. And I'm like, I'm saying it like, oh, you guys are going to get all of your, like, I'll literally be making calls tomorrow to try to shake loose your info. So like, I'm in it with you, but man, oh man, like the more we can create predictable, sustainable revenue, like understanding the dynamics of retention, knowing our number, knowing like really what impacts revenue over the long haul, like, gosh, it's such a difference maker.
It really is. It really, really is, isn't it? I really like the way you just said, we're talking about a 20-year problem, right? And so that's one of the things that we really focus on is like, let's quantify what the actual problem is that your nonprofit exists to solve. Let's know what that is. If we are specific to a region, if we're specific to a cause, let's do the math. Just looking at it from a business standpoint, what's the total available market for this problem? What's the service available market for this problem? And what piece of that are we going after in the next 5 years? And so looking at it from that standpoint, and we just ask like, what's that going to cost? Right. And that's where we start to get into operational data, financial data. We're looking at dollar per outcome, dollar per output, all of that fun stuff. But it requires, you used the phrase, it was with water.org, but you were talking about, we needed lazy money. We needed, lazy capital. We needed a term we've used it before, so patient money. So a good dear friend of ours who runs a private equity company, but it's more of a social impact private equity company.
Yeah.
They had to start by raising money from DAF funds, for donor advice funds, because they knew it was way more patient than typical private equity. Like you got this long to make this happen or we're out. Whereas with DAFs is obviously very different. And so thinking about who's the type of funder that understands this is a big, hairy problem, right? We're not going to solve this in 12 months. We might solve this in, 20 years.
Yeah.
But
still, part of that's like,
go ahead.
Like knowing your donors. So part of the problem is like, it's hard to know your donors at scale. What ends up happening, I talk about this a ton, but like nonprofits know their top 100 donors really well, know what drives them, their passions. In the next 10,000, they are just names in a database, right? Well, what happens is now when you have this problem where maybe you have a chunk of your donors that are just never going to be strategic patient capital.
Mm.
But man, if they see a picture of a kid or a puppy and they know that they can fund that thing, they're going to give all day, every day. There's nothing wrong with that. You just got to know who those people are, right? And then you have a chunk that's like, man, the strategic big vision, like they don't even mind you screwing up your 990 and spending more on capacity building and fundraising because they know it's a 20-year problem and they want to invest for the long haul. Like,
Right.
how do we figure out who those people are? And now how do we deliver different messaging and story to each around what resonates? And it's a hard problem to solve, but it's a problem that if you can lean in and fix that, like it opens up a world of opportunity.
Completely. But it just takes a few tests to get there, right? If you have their
Yes.
database, if you have their data,
Yep.
let's just test out some different email campaigns. Let's A/B test a few pictures. Let's A/B
That's
test a
right.
few things.
That's
It
right.
doesn't cost very much to do that.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Yeah. That's why I love like Facebook as a platform, like Facebook as your primary channel for fundraising. Yeah, there's a few very special orgs that raise a ton of money off of Facebook, right? But that's the exception and not the rule. But I think the thing that's the rule is you can figure out what resonates with people real quick. Like you can spend a couple $100 on Facebook ads against 2 different messages and just watch. Do people hang out on that message? Do they click on it? Like what happened when they scroll through that thing? And that gives you insights that can impact the entire rest of your fundraising strategy.
You're 100% right. So I was did an in-person strategy last week, and I asked them, where are you getting your constituents? Like, how do you attract your constituents to your programs? And this one director, she stood up, she goes, well, we spent money on Facebook ads. I'm like, awesome. That's great. How much did you spend and how many constituents did you get? We spent $50 and we filled up our entire constituent pipeline. I said, do what? you spent $50 and you did that?
Yeah. To throw more gas on that fire. If
I was
that's
like, are you
true,
kidding?
like all of your gas goes on that fire until those economics aren't right.
Exactly. I'm like, that is the most wild thing I've ever heard. $50 and that worked for you? I had to look at that. I was like, let's break down the math here.
Yeah.
Like, am I really
Yeah.
understanding this?
Yeah.
No,
If
it's
that's
fantastic.
really true, I will write that organization a check tomorrow because that's amazing.
Right. We did find out that they had a few little monkey wrenches in the delivery of it. That like, okay, we need to solve that before we go crazy. But the ability to attract people to their program, because that is another common issue. You see, we're going to go start this new initiative. They don't do a needs assessment. They don't work with a local group, or they don't get insights, and they start these programs that no one's interested in going to. Like,
Yeah.
we see that a lot, and it's like, okay, that's a huge issue. But
Yeah.
let's move back to what you wrote in the book. We talked about Agile, but what would you just say when we're looking at OKRs? What is a good way for a nonprofit to view that kind of goal-based data tracking?
Yeah.
Where do you advise people when it comes to, we need to start doing OKRs and KPIs?
Yeah. Yeah. OKRs are good. Objectives and key results is what OKR stand for. It's a great way. It's just a way for us to set quarterly goals that we're all going after together, right? And another one, more and more nonprofits are adopting the EOS framework. So if you've been at a bunch of nonprofit conferences lately, you probably heard somebody, mention EOS. Like, I love EOS. The book Traction is a great place to start if you're trying to figure out how to do this. But for me, it comes down to a couple of things. Is number one, we all need to be aligned on not the activity we're going after, but the number, right? We need to have like 3 to 5 numbers we want to impact as an organization this year. And then within each of the teams, we need to know what our number is and what good looks like. And that, and generally a good OKR or good in EOS, it's called a rock, right? That's your goal, is a rock. You want it to be like a little bit of a stretch. Like, I've heard John Doerr, that wrote the book on OKRs, is like, there needs to be like a 30% chance that you may not hit this thing, right? It needs to be, you want SMART goals that are attainable, is the A in SMART, right? But at the same time, you want it to be like hard, right? And if you don't hit it, you don't want to like punish people for failing. You just want to figure out what you learned and how you can get better next time. The other part that I really like about like OKR framework and EOS is in my view, it's not just that the organization, quote unquote, should know the numbers they're going after. Every person on the team should know their number. So like if I walked around Virtuous right now, I'm in our office, I could ask everybody on my team what's their number.
Mhm.
And everybody knows their number, and they know how that number rolls up and impacts the overall number. Like our big mission is we want to create $10 billion in net new generosity in the world, right? So that rolls down to how much do we want to create this year? Well, how many customers do we need? How many of those customers need to stick around year over year because they love us, right? And how much do those customers need to grow giving? And everybody on my team can translate their job to, they can look at a dashboard every day and know how the work they're doing is contributing to that thing. It's harder for nonprofits to, if I walked around a typical nonprofit, you don't get that as often where you just walk up to a seat and like, hey, what's your number and how does that contribute to the overall mission we're here for? It gets a lot more fuzzy, right? But the faster you get clarity on that, you'll start running real fast.
So good. I remember the first time I heard someone from your marketing team say that. I said, I would really love to have net new bolded, italicized, and underlined, because that's the big kick right there. It's the net new generosity.
Yeah.
So thinking like that's the goal of the organization, right? That's the goal of Virtuous. Net new generosity. It's not just, hey, switch your CRM, switch your fundraising platform. And, over time, you're going to make more money and we'll take credit for it. It's that net new side that's so exciting and just invigorating to look at. But you're saying
for me being in like,
go ahead.
For me being like an also ran in the nonprofit technology space is not interesting, right? There's other stuff I can do with my time. Like for us, it's all about, are we actually solving the problem, which is, generosity, $500 billion, 2.5% of GDP. It's like, can we move the needle on that? Like, and especially in the US, like it's not a shortage of money or time, right? Like we have money and time. We like, can we impact how people think and so that they're using that money and time differently? That's the thing that matters.
That's so good. Like moving the GDP. That's such a good macro way of looking at that. And so when we talk about everyone on your team has a number, like soup to nuts, you all the way down to the most recent hire, everyone knows their number.
Yep.
And so let's say someone's listening to this, like, I want to at least do that.
Yep.
Let's just play around with a couple of numbers for operations, for finance. Let's just say fundraising, marketing, programs, and finance. What would be some numbers that come to your mind that like consider this and then consider that? Where would your mind go with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's different on the program side. You guys deal with that all day, every day, but it's like, dollar per outcome created.
Totally.
Quantitatively, and then qualitatively is that if you went, and so I feel like all quantitative numbers should be backed up qualitatively, right? And so if now you're saying $1 of spend creates this outcome in the world, if I selected 100 program recipients and interviewed them today, would they say the same thing? That's the outcome that they experienced, right? And so you have the qualitative and quantitative together. And so everybody should know that data. By the way, as a side note, you should also be able to communicate that impact back to your donor in almost real time. So if your donor gives $100 to build a well in Malawi, you should be able to know that they gave to that well and communicate, here's the picture of the well in Malawi in the community, and here's what your dollar accomplished, right?
Exactly.
So
100%.
On the fundraising side, I really do think, I mean, we just launched a benchmark report a couple of months ago. And so, I think for us, there's, 5 key metrics with some nuance to them, but it comes down to donor retention. Well, like that should be a number. Everybody, not just in your fundraising, but comms should own donor retention. And that should be like a KPI every quarter that you're trying to move it 2% every quarter, right? Donor expansion, which is kind of I think not talked about enough, but it's like your donors who gave last year, how much do they increase their giving this year, right? So of your sort of, if you're looking at like not your live bots, the one that didn't give again, but your actives from last year, how much more did they give? Because you deepen the relationship, you were able to craft a better ask. And so expansion is a huge part of it. Obviously, new donor acquisition, is a big part of it. And one like that gets misunderstood a lot, and I see a bigger and bigger problem with this is like portfolio balance. And so what's happened in the US is a couple of things have happened where you have sort of a shrinking middle class. You have more wealth concentrated with the super wealthy. There's a growing gap between the have and the have-nots.
Mm-hmm.
And also everyday givers, you have like, drop in church attendance in the US, inflationary pressure, and just the distraction of social media. All these reasons contribute to like, there's less kind of middle class people that are given $100 a month than there used to be, right? There's that pocket is shrinking. And so what happens is, like, if you looked at the pie graph of most organizations, even if they're hitting their same number, let's say it's $5 million, what you see is a greater percentage of that 5 million is taken up by $100,000 checks that you're praying to come in at the end of the year, right? Which is super painful. So that's a long way of saying, man, you should know like the right portfolio balance of how many smalls, recurring especially, how many mids, how many majors, and how am I graduating people through that circle? And that graph should be sort of front and center to your whole team.
But those are 5 metrics. I mean, they're all inside of the Virtuous dashboard if my memory serves me well. But it's the kind of thing where people know the inputs, like the daily activities they would need to do to produce that. It makes job descriptions and job training a whole lot easier, right? If my job is to increase retention by 2% every single quarter, that's what I'm focusing on. Great. Wearing out phone calls and emails and, thank you notes and going to these people's, places of work and saying, I just want to let you know the impact that you created last month with your gift.
Right.
I wanted to personally show you what you did. You're a rock star. Thank you so much.
That's right.
Those are my activities. I'm not distracted by, hey, maybe we should consider, this Google Ads grant, or maybe we should consider a gala. It's like, no, my job's retention. My job is to retain the donors that we currently have through these day-to-day activities. It's so helpful and so clarifying.
Yeah, 100%. And sometimes the data is hard to get to, right? Like if I'm running the email program at a nonprofit, I should be able to say my emails that I sent last month, how many people that engaged with that email gave last year, and soon after that email gave again this year. Like, was that effective? If my KPI, if my OKR as the digital marketing person is increased retention by 3%, like, can I look at every email and say, what happened with my donors as a result of that email? Because that's the thing. And sometimes, like, your newsletter person doesn't even know what the donor retention number, right? And so it's like there's that disconnect where they don't actually know if they're having an impact.
And that's such a good point, because the OKR, someone could think, well, my metric is open rate. No, it's retention rate, right?
It's
like we can
retention
talk
rate.
about open rate like that, but that doesn't really mean anything. Retention
That's
rate
right.
means everything to the nonprofit. And so just tweaking the metric so that it actually drives an outcome is super, super helpful.
Yeah. And now things like open rate are not bad. They're great. They're leading indicators, but they're not the thing itself, right? And so, like, I'm all for leading indicators. And, generally as a nonprofit, if you're getting like massive open rates, you're probably doing something right, which is great, right? But you can't stop there. You got to follow through to like, did it get me to my number?
Right. I think it's such a good way to put that. And so what would you say is sort of, I really want to talk to you about MarTech's law, because when we think about the challenges that a lot of decision makers at organizations, they might be thinking like, dude, what is going on with AI right now? Like, and how is that going to be a part of our strategy? And I'm thinking, am I even going to have a job in 3 years because of what AI is doing right now? And then thinking, let's just define MarTech's law, because I like the methodology, and I think it actually was John Doerr that helps me with this. It's like, instead of thinking about all this rate of change as a terrifying thing, just thinking it like surfing on a surfboard. Like, there's plenty of waves. Like, just get out there and start surfing, and guess what? There's going to be another wave. And so get out there and start surfing again. I'm a terrible surfer. As much as I love it, I'm terrible. But just thinking, how would you define MarTech's law and then help leaders see themselves in these waves that are coming in, and how they can surf it rather than being, swamped by it?
Yeah. It's a great analogy. MarTech's law generally is society generally has an increasing rate of innovation, and so and it's always been true. Like my friend Dave Rayleigh always says, innovation is old, right? I mean, whether you're talking about the printing press or fire or the wheel, like we've
Right.
always been doing this thing, but what you see is innovation stacks on top of itself. So, a good example is, when I was my senior year of high school, my friends on the street finally got the internet, and you get the modem with and then and it's like, man, you're online. But it was a pretty lo-fi internet at the time, right? But then shortly after, you get MySpace, so social media for the first time, and then the iPhone hits, and then you get apps on the iPhone. And then all of a sudden, social media is on the iPhone, and then you have like Uber, and then Lyft, and Airbnb, and AI, and each of these are different companies that look at the innovation that came before, and they stack the next innovation on top of it. They see a future that doesn't exist, and they stack the next innovation. So you see this innovation curve that's quickly going up to the right. Well, the way organizations are designed is that organizations are thinking, I need to get 5% better every year, right? And so they're like, man, if we get 5% better every year. So organizations are growing at this like nice little like linear clip, like, 5%, maybe a little bit up and to the right, but the world around them is moving really fast. And so what happens in nonprofit is, you have nice steady eddy growth of 3 to 5%, and all of a sudden you look around 10 years later and the world around you has fundamentally changed, right? And it creates this existential threat where, like, the examples I use in my book are like Blockbuster is a perfect example. Blockbuster could have bought Netflix, but they couldn't imagine a world where people would be streaming movies on their computer. Like they did not even have a bucket for that in their head. And so they passed on it and then ended up getting crushed by them, right? Because for them, man, if we just grow 5% a year, we'll be fine. And then they missed one too many waves, right? And so for nonprofits, as you're thinking about this, it is important to sort of lean into innovation, but to not be scared to sort of paddle into the next wave. It doesn't mean you have to change your whole organization overnight, but you can't be risk averse. Like you just have to sort of like jump in. So AI is a perfect example right now. Every nonprofit should be using AI today to make program and fundraising better. There's no reason that you shouldn't be. And if you're going to wait to do a 3-year study on whether AI is effective, like AI will be completely different 3 years from now, and there'll be another thing that's stacked on top of it. So it's getting in the water and trying the thing out and having this curiosity and experimentation. And then when it's clear that the world is moving faster, like this is hard, but you have to be willing to make step function changes every once in a while. And man, it's hard because sometimes there's jobs and people's lives on the line here. I get it, but man, making that step function change when it's become clear that's the thing is way better than dying a death by 1,000 cuts, right? And so I don't know if that's helpful, but that's sort of the world we're living in.
It definitely is the world we're living in. I think that was very well said. But just thinking, step function change, that sounds like a really terrifying term. But let's just break it down. Like, let's break it down as to like, what would that look like for an organization? Breaking down the silo, like changing the way you manage your team leads to these step function changes. Changing the way you process data or how quickly information is readily available. Like we create a lot of impact dashboards because there are teams that we work with that will be in a rural clinic and they're capturing impact data on paper. Someone there, prays that there's not a hurricane that comes through and, that it doesn't rain and ruins the paper forms, puts it into a spreadsheet, which that's then emailed to somebody back at HQ. Then we have to dive into it and fix it. And be like, whoa, this is a terrible spreadsheet. What can we actually get out of this? And so the kind of work that we started doing years ago was, now let's just make this whole process digitized. We need to work online, offline, nothing terribly sophisticated. It's not building software like you do. Just let's make this an actual digitized process. But what does that allow? Instantaneous access to data. They just right out the gate, the second that patient is inputted, we have a profile, we have their BMI, we know what their maladies are. It's obviously protected with HIPAA and things like that, but it's like it's a readily available.
That's right.
Like that isn't that hard, right? That's not the craziest thing in the world. Like that can be a huge step forward. But like, what would be another well, actually, I'd like to hear from your perspective. Like you're a tech entrepreneur. What are the kinds of stepwise functions that you can really see make a huge difference?
Yeah. I mean, I think a couple of things there, just even circling back to what you just said, is I think it's really important for you to sort of nonprofits to draw in pencil, because it could change, but draw out like what we think this new world will look like for us.
That's a good way to put that.
Right.
Yeah.
And then draw it in pencil. But then, a lot of people in business use the terminology stacking wins. And so what you want to do is just start stacking a lot of small wins. So if you're like, we need to get to this thing, like what small win can we create in the next 2 weeks? Well, how about, is there a way for the person not to email it and print it? What if the email just went here instead? Like, could we do that? Right. And like, let's start stacking small wins that we know are going to get us. So if everybody knows what the end state is, we don't have to, eat the elephant all in one bite, right? You just start stacking wins. And eventually you look up a year later and it's like, man, we're here. We did it, right? But part of that, being able to do that, is in tech, people always talk about like um, casting a vision for this aspirational reality that doesn't quite yet exist, right? And so you kind of have to have somebody that like dreams and they're a little bit stupid, right? It's like, I heard Reid Hoffman, he's the founder of LinkedIn, talking on a podcast and talking about Elon Musk. He's not a big Elon fan. They're on opposite ends of the political spectrum. But what he said about Elon, which was super interesting, was like, he's just like stupid enough to believe in this massive vision. Like he's willing to say out loud, we should colonize Mars. Right. And it's like, who would say something like that? That's a ridiculous thing. But the things that resulted from that are like SpaceX and Starlink and like all of this amazing innovation are the wins that have to get stacked, which are all pretty great wins in and of themselves, right? Yeah. But you got to have somebody at your organization that like isn't afraid to dream of this aspirational reality. Like, man, what kind of crazy outcome could we go after? And you don't want to create too much whiplash in your team. So you don't want to run into the team like, we're doing this, right? But you want to like cast a big vision and then clearly communicate the wins that need to get stacked into that vision.
Gabe, I think that might be one of the best points I've ever heard on this conversation, because there are a lot of dreamers out there. There are a lot of innovators out there, but that whiplash side, I think, is so important. And I've been so guilty of this because I am stupid enough to like believe some of these things. But man, the steps to get there, right? I'm not the genius side. I think I'm just the stupid side. The steps to get there are so important. It was like, asking the question, we have a client that is all about maternal and child health. What would it look like if maternal mortality was 0%? Like, what would have to be true in order for that? What would have to be true if human trafficking was no longer a thing?
It's great.
Right?
I love that.
Don't you think it's those kinds of questions, or like, how would you add more like and your perspective to that?
Yeah. I love that idea of like what would have to exist. That's an exercise we do with our board.
Cool.
And actually when we do like 5-year annual planning, like we ask that, like what would have to be true, right? And then if we didn't get there, like what would have gone wrong? Like you play out like what would we have missed on if we look around in 5 years and we didn't get there, right? And so I think that's step one. But then step two is now you go, that's 5 years. Now you go to a year and say, what would have to be true at the end of the first year?
Right.
Like the gates we know we would need to clear. If we're going to get there in 5, what are the gates at 1 year? And what are the gates this quarter? And then what are the gates in the next 2 weeks? And then what are the gates in the next 2 weeks in our marketing team, right? And now your marketing team doesn't feel like, that's an impossible reality. They're just like, I know what I got to do in the next 2 weeks. Like if we're going to get there, right? And I
Gosh.
think chunking it out that way, and that's where you have. It's actually hard. And in EOS, there's a separate book called Rocket Fuel where you have like a visionary and an integrator. It's like
Right.
it's hard to find both of those in the same person. So you end up with either a visionary who like sees the big picture and they're like, just do it. And everybody's like, well, that's horrifying, right? Or you have an integrator without a vision, which is just like, here's the things we need to do in the next 2 weeks, but you don't know where you're going. You kind of, I would say if you're an executive director of a nonprofit listening to this and you're the visionary, you got to find somebody, a right-hand person that can break the things down to like, so the marketing team knows what they have to do in the next 2 weeks.
See, that's so great because you immediately brought it down to like departmental level, right? It's not just here's what has to be true as an organization. It's like, no, what do we have to do as a marketing department to make that happen? What do we have to do as a development department? What do our programs need to look like in order for that to happen? So Duke University has one of my favorite trainings, and I love bragging on them, the Center for the Advancement of Social Entrepreneurship. Their leadership out there, I mean, they're some of my favorite people in the world. And they do this training on, you have engine 1 versus engine 2. Like engine 1 is, this is the impact that we've created thus far. Like this is what we've created. This is our program. This is how we know it works. We're super excited about it. But whoa, there's a much bigger problem out there that engine 1 isn't capable of going out there to solve. It's just not the right kind of engine. So engine 2 is very disruptive. It's very different. And we're either going to go crazy deep with impact or we're going to go really, really wide with impact. And there's only a few plays that we can run to go make that happen.
Yes.
And like what you're saying is that it's how to operationalize it. It's what would have to be true in order to solve this problem for real. Then let's reduce this down to like departments, and then let's reduce it down to like daily activities in 2-week sprints. Like that's exciting work, right? Like that's the kind of work that will turn anyone into a workaholic because you want to solve that problem.
That's right. I think the other important thing there is, I talk a little bit about this in the book, but like if you're part of the engine 2 team, right? That you're responsible for innovation and disruption here. Number one, it's okay if you have people on your team that are like engine 1 people, right? You still need to line them up around metrics and have them know how they're winning. It actually helps your employees stick around a long time if they know how they're contributing and how they're winning, right? It's just like, it's great for morale and culture. But if you're on that engine 2, if you're doing engine 2 work, I always encourage everybody to start by saying, I have a hypothesis, right? And some of my friends like at Next After and other sort of testing organizations, like will use the same language all the time, but it's like the idea that I actually don't know if this is going to work and we're going to learn here, right? And so we don't actually know, if you're on that engine 2 team, if I do this, this is going to happen. It's like, if I do this, I think this is going to happen, but we're going to learn really quick what works and what doesn't, and then we're going to test again. And so like that engine 2 should be a lab for learning and a hypothesis testing more than like because you just don't know it the same way you know engine 1.
That's such a good way to put that. So let's talk about whiplash prevention for a minute, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying is so good. And I know so many people, present company included, that would benefit from how to prevent whiplash. And so thinking, before we go roll this out to the whole team, we need to have a sounding board, whether you have that integrator on your team or not. But we're going to use this sounding board like, I think this is the world that we could go create, that we could be a part of creating. Probably a better way of saying that. I have these hypotheses as to what we're going to do, but what would we need to change? What would need to be true? And then how can we chunk this down as a department on a quarterly and on a biweekly level? But like always coming at this with, we need to both innovate, but have stability at the same time. So engine 1 is that more stable side. Engine 2 is much more disruptive.
Yeah.
How would you like to roll out, or how do you roll out that stability and innovation?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard. Sometimes you literally just have to pull a couple members of your team off and put them on innovation because it's actually hard to do engine 1 and engine 2. So we'll do that sometimes at Virtuous. but I think like so much of that is actually like an organizational culture thing. So sometimes it's executive leaders, CEOs, and executive directors are notoriously bad at this thing, is they're running in with some new harebrained idea every week, and it causes organizational whiplash. And so if that's you, like have some self-awareness, like, know that the things you're describing, people are translating to those as like, my job's in jeopardy, or I'm gonna have to work 80 hours a week, right? And like, be careful of your messaging, have a closer group around you that you can vet some of this stuff with, and so like the potential whiplash you're creating.
That's
I
good.
would say at a certain point, though, there's like a good chunk of your organization that just needs to hear, we're going to change, we're going to go big here, right? Because you actually want people on the boat with you that are willing to go big. And so there's a balance there as well. I think for the rest of the organization, it really just is about organizational culture. So I think a lot of it comes down to like hiring and culture. Like you should talk. Consider there's actually an organization here in my building. They're doing really cool work, but they've actually reframed what they do as an innovation lab. Like
cool.
if you go to work there, like the way, even in their interview process, they're like, we want people that think like tech entrepreneurs that work here, right? Like and even positioning with people is like, we do this at Virtuous. Like our goal is like huge growth and impact. What that means for you personally, your job description will probably change 8 times in the next 4 years. Like, but you get to be a part of this amazing story.
Right.
Is that the thing you want, right? And you just be real honest about that. And you be real honest with what you end up doing is you build a team of people that culturally, they understand what a win looks like. So they have clear goals. They know that we're growing and things are going to change, and they embrace that. They want to be on the front edge of it. And yeah, you might lose a couple of people along the way, and that's okay. There's always another place for those people to be and be effective doing the thing that they're doing, and that's okay too. But I really do think it's so much of it is about the culture that you create, and like where we there's a buddy of mine that uses quote, I use it all the time. He's like, I want to destroy and humanely dispose of the status quo. And so like, we want people that are thinking that way all the time. Like we dismantle the status quo. That's the thing we do here. Right. But that has to be like preached consistently at every level of your organization.
It's pretty fun that you've used the pirate analogy. We're talking about people that are destroying the status quo. Like magical things can happen when you get smart, motivated buccaneers together and who want to make a difference. I think it's a pretty amazing thing, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, that's amazing.
So, as Virtuous has grown, have you seen any of the organizational challenges that you've been like, oh wow, like just take the playbooks out of the book that you wrote, right? Just going back to your book, it's like, ooh, we were running into this problem. We were hitting our head on the ceiling. Maybe we need to apply one of these practices, because we see this with nonprofits all the time. It's like I keep hitting my head on that ceiling, and then they make a shift and they blast right through that ceiling. I'm curious if you've experienced that, probably dozens of times, but I'm curious if you have an example.
Yeah, a ton of examples. I mean, I know a lot of orgs. I've talked a lot about who have implemented EOS, like we talked about, and now all of a sudden they have clear goals and everybody knows their number. That's probably one of the most obvious ones. There's several orgs that we've talked to that have implemented human-centered design. I think water.org is the example that I give in the book, but several others that have implemented that, and all of a sudden they know what the program needs are and their fundraising needs are with clarity for the first time, because they're hearing it from the horse's mouth on like a weekly basis, right? So those are ones I see most often. I know a few orgs that I've worked with that do Agile now. They do everything in 2-week sprints. The other one that I think is underappreciated is I have a chapter in the book around storytelling, and so I'll use in the book I use the Invisible Children Coney 2012 video to sort of illustrate this, and to stay with the biggest obligatory examples, I can use Charity Water to illustrate at that time, because what's a nonprofit podcast without referencing Charity Water?
You have to, right?
But yeah, but it's this idea that what I hear from so many orgs is we can't do that because we're resource constrained. Like we
Right.
just don't have the people to do it. And we don't have the money to hire the people to do it. And, my pushback is always like, but you have like 10,000 people that are rabid fans for your cause. Like in this deep heart way, like in many cases, your cause impacted them personally, right? Like,
Yes.
I was meeting with where I live, the town of Gilbert this morning. They're building a domestic violence shelter, and we're talking about an executive director of one of the orgs that'll be as part of this like community of nonprofits that surround victims of domestic violence.
Oh, cool.
And one of the executive directors is a domestic violence survivor, right? And like a lot of the people that donate to the cause are survivors of domestic violence. It's like, gosh, you have these people that are just, they've been touched directly. Man, they are so passionate about it. Why are you thinking about your 6 staff members? Like, you have an army of people that desperately want to solve that problem. And so that's one where, Charity Water kind of got this. They got really good at storytelling, right? Like imagery and videos and giving people something to go do. It wasn't just give us money. It's like, you give up your birthday, take this water jug, write it on a corner, like show it, send us your video of the most creative, crazy thing you're doing. And they just like created an army. And it's cheesy. It sounds even like the ice bucket challenge a few years ago, or like the pink ribbon stuff. It's like, it can be overplayed and people say, well, that's all like, hype and there's really no money behind it. There's actually a good amount of money behind it because you're giving people something to do. Like you're activating your community, right? And so for me, that's the one where I've seen, Charity Water is a good example. We have several other orgs like Atlas Free is one of my favorite orgs that I work with. Like even as part of their fundraising, he takes a lot of his donors on these like crazy hikes, like they'll hike up Mount Hood and do all of this insane adventure stuff.
Yeah.
Where it's like, they're not names in a database or checkbooks anymore. They're like real people that are really passionate about your cause. How do you put them to work? And the orgs that do that well, all of a sudden they're not talking about staff constraints anymore. They're just not.
I think part of the challenge and the opportunity is that nonprofits have so many levers that they can pull. And it's knowing which lever do I pull and which one's going to be most effective.
Yeah.
Volunteers, right? I mean, just the fact of having free labor, right? That is something that is outlawed in the business world for very obvious reasons. It is something that is encouraged in the nonprofit space.
Yes.
And it's like, how do we leverage that pull that lever effectively? There are nonprofits that exist that reduce their dollar per output by 85+% simply by having volunteers be a part of their program. It's like, what does that do mathematically? It means the sky's the freaking limit as to what you can accomplish when it goes to scaling your programs.
Yeah.
It's this amazing lever to pull. But it's like, well, how do I do it? Or we don't have the constraint, or we don't have the ability to do it. Man, you can start somewhere, and that one thing can scale to a huge, huge opportunity.
Yeah. And the massive unlock with volunteer too is like, you should have a volunteer program, but step one is you have like all the volunteers are doing the same thing. They're all working at the food bank, sticking the things on the shelves. Right. That's actually a great place to start. There is nothing wrong with that at all. It's awesome. Right. Next level is like, figure out how those people are. Like the person stacking the cans at the food bank is like, one of the most well-respected digital marketers on the planet. You should know that because they could help, right? And it's like, know who your people are and then be more sophisticated in how those people are deployed. That's really a magic unlock.
It is. And maybe I've just spent a little too much time in finance, but just looking at like studying financials, but just looking at what does that do for a nonprofit? I mean, literally like what multiply their time given by a typical hourly rate. And then how much, true labor impact did you create simply because of that? Yeah. And then you start thinking, well, how do I model this out across our entire nonprofit? It turns into a very compelling conversation, like a very, very compelling conversation. But what you're talking about is let's tap into the community. And we're going back to breaking down silos. And you can do this with Virtuous, where you've got volunteer management, you've got your donor management, you have all of this syncing together. So instead of being in 10 different platforms, like a lot of organizations are, I can see that, you know, XYZ person, Sally, that's, stacking cans, like, whoa, did you know she was the VP of marketing at whatever
Yep,
company? Can we bring her onto a women's board? And now we're
that's right.
starting to do this whole different behemoth of a nonprofit that can do incredible things.
100%.
Really, really exciting things.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. When you think about, if I said, Gabe, this all sounds great, but we don't have the resources for it, where do you say, if you were going to start somewhere, and you mentioned this at the beginning, like if you're going to read through the book, okay, but which one of these is hurting the most? And then just start there. How would you define like a quick win? If I'm going to pick, Agile, if I'm going to pick OKRs, if I'm going to pick something out of your book,
Yeah.
updating my CRM to Virtuous, if I'm going to pick any of these things, how would you tell the team to redefine winning? Because I think people have this idea, well, we're never going to be Facebook. We're never going to be,
Definitely.
this highly innovative company. We're never going to be IDEO. We're never going to be NVIDIA. We're not going to be those people. How do you see it differently? I'm curious.
Yeah. I mean, I'd push back on that a little bit. I mean, there's plenty of nonprofits that have the same sort of like impact profile as the companies you just mentioned, right? So I don't
Totally.
think that's out of the question for the nonprofit space
Totally.
that you could have that sort of impact profile. And so I wouldn't limit yourself too much. It's like, well, that's not possible. It really, like, people have done it, right? And so,
Absolutely.
um, but in terms of defining what winning looks like, I think one of the things that I talk a lot about is it doesn't have to be the entire organization all at once. And so one of the best hacks of this stuff is people are sometimes slow to believe something's going to work, right? But once something starts working, you actually start with it being a little bit more exclusive. Like,
Yeah.
who's my little innovation team here that'll adopt something? And you get them doing the thing. And then the rest of the organization's like, hey, like, what are they doing?
Right.
And so, like, for example, adopting Agile, getting everybody working in 2 week sprints across your entire organization, let's say you have 30 staff members, 100 staff members, that's really hard, right?
Yeah.
Just start with your marketing team, right? Your marketing and comms, and get them working that way, and then reporting out on their results and learnings to the rest of the team, just in a 2-week
Mhm.
summary email. Here's what we experimented with. Here's what we're right. Here's what went wrong. Here's what we learned. Here's what we're trying for the next 2 weeks, right?
Love it.
And what you do is now, instead of creating like this, you're trying to push something into the organization. You're creating a pull, where now all of a sudden is like other department leaders like, I want to do that, right? And it
Right.
becomes contagious, right? And so I think that probably Agile is the first one, and then goals with everybody knows their number. You may not be able to implement EOS organization wide overnight.
Mhm.
I think it's possible to roll out EOS in the course of 6 months. It's not that hard, but still, it may feel like a lift. Get one team, your fundraising team, you know, a small team responsible for one part of your program impact, and say,
Right.
can we get where everybody knows their number? Can we set clear goals? Do we trust the data? And is everybody going after those goals? And then you showcase that to the rest of the team. Then all of a sudden everybody's like, gosh, that team seems so much happy and they're crushing it, right?
That's such a good point. And it doesn't have to cost very much, right?
No.
Like these are decisions. These aren't necessarily, you don't have to bring in, an
Mm-mm.
EOS certified consultant to do
Nope.
it. Read the book and start somewhere, right? You can
Yes.
literally just start somewhere. And just thinking about those kinds of changes. You know, we're looking at how are we going to reorganize our Asana board to better manage work in progress. And so like took 2 hours to read the book and taking some notes, like, all right, let's test it out. Let's just see what this looks like, come the first week of January. And so just thinking you can start so simply, and it's easy when you're smaller teams versus larger teams, but start with the small team. Start with
Yeah.
what that quick win look like. See if it's worth anyone's time
Yeah.
and go that route.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love like the work you guys do at Social Impact Solutions. I think you have such a profound impact. And so I'm saying that very nice thing because I'm about to say kind of a mean thing, which is like sometimes, like as nonprofits, we like we may want to pay an agency or a third party to show up in a suit and tell us the thing we already knew we needed to do, but we were just scared to do it. And now we just paid somebody to tell us, and now we're going to do it. We actually don't have to wait for that moment, right? Like
I had it
the
last week.
people, the agencies aren't smarter than you. Like, you know the right thing. Just be brave and take the first step.
I don't know how many times I hear, hey, it would be really helpful if leadership heard you say this, or if they heard someone from our team say this. Like, so say that thing that you're saying that you already know to be true. Like, why wouldn't you just tell them? Oh, I don't think we would be very well received if we did that. Like, outside voices are a lot more effective.
Yeah,
Like,
there's
well, I don't
truth
know
to
if I could.
that. I get it. Like I do that too. Like I
I
totally
bet.
get it. But sometimes you can just do the next thing, right? You just just do it, right?
Just like you said, do the next right thing. Like what your point was at the
That's
beginning.
right.
And Frozen
Yep.
2. I think that's
Yep.
so important. I do want to brag on Virtuous because I'm a CRM junkie. I spend lots of times in CRMs. And so whether they're enterprise CRMs, upstart CRMs, and I love everyone in between, right? So I do really like a CRM that is designed for an organization with one person and five donors. Like there's a place for that, right? Business
100%.
business opportunity, like there's a great
Yeah.
place for that. I love I love being able to dive deep into data. And so having a more robust database is extremely important. A malleable database is super important for that. But I think you guys really hit an interesting part of the market. Like I'm sure this was intentional, but there's just not a lot of options for nonprofits who really want to professionalize without having to spend exorbitant amounts of money to do so. And I think that's that's a customer base, a nonprofit base that matters so much because those are the scale ups, the gazelles that they talk about and scaling up and all those others.
Mhm.
Those are the up and comers who are going to make a huge impact. They need the tools to be able to do it. And Virtuous is a fabulous platform to be able to leverage so many like built-in tools that are enterprise quality, enterprise grade, that are so important. It's those 5 dashboards that we were talking about, those 5 numbers that we need just for marketing and development. It's baked into the process. You would have to build that out in Salesforce or HubSpot. Like you would have to go out and understand the data and how you're going to create that to make it a reality. Tell
Yeah.
us just why that subset of nonprofit and how Virtuous really is a beautiful platform for it.
Yeah. I think it's a good point. I mean, realistically, most of our customers raise between like $1 million and $100 million a year. That's
Yeah.
kind of what you call that, like the mid-market to low enterprise side, right? Like
Yeah.
not serving world vision today, right? But be pretty
Some point.
scaled, but there's actually some great, I just recommended a solution this morning that wasn't, they thought they were going to buy Virtuous. I'm like, nope, you're not ready yet, right? Because it's like a volunteer board, 20 donors, you're going to kill a fly with a hammer. It's not the right
Exactly.
tool, right?
Exactly.
That middle of the market, what we found was, they're just, you can either pay a lot of money to build Salesforce, because Salesforce is a super powerful tool, but it's a build and not a buy solution, meaning you got to build almost everything you need in there. Now, if you have the means to build it, right, like that's great, but most people don't have the means to sort of custom build the thing you want.
Mm-hmm.
And then, felt like some of the other tools just weren't built for the right job. And what I mean by that is, we really believe in this idea of responsive fundraising, which is nonprofits should be able to build personal relationships with donors at scale. And to do that, you have to have all your data in one place and know who your donors are. You got to know which emails they're clicking on. Do they visit your website? Like, what's their giving capacity? Did they volunteer? And you have to have, what are their interests? Like what are they passionate about? Why did they give? Like, you need to see all of that data in one place. You have to listen. You have to be able to connect at scale, which means, not just your 100 major donors, but it means the next 10,000. How do I send them the right message at the right time without hiring 20 new people on my staff, right? Like,
Exactly.
how do I automate a lot of touch points, which doesn't mean just like, you're kind of turning your fundraising process into an AI driven robot, but it's like, you can't you can't call all of those people every week. So you got to automate the right touch points. And then when it makes sense for a conversation, somebody on your team should get prompted to pick up the phone or do the handwritten note, but at the right time. You got to use your time really well, right?
Mhm.
And that idea of responsive fundraising, that's happened in the for-profit space, right? Like most of your brand experiences you get are all personalized to you. It just hasn't happened in nonprofit yet. So really, we're building the tool not just to be, you know, the cool web-based version of the old legacy tools, right? That's like not that interesting to me. Really, what we wanted to do was increase global generosity, which for me means you got to build more personal relationships with your donors and clearly see your data and be able to ask the right person for the right thing at the right time based on their passions, which is it's sort of a bigger and different problem to solve. And so really we built it to solve that problem.
It's so good. It's so, so good. And so you're able to take, some of these ideas that are, like you said, they're prevalent in the enterprise CRM space.
Yep.
And then let's convert that, because nonprofit is a completely different language. It's a completely different database
Totally different.
structure through and through. Not the same thing. And so unless you want to figure out how to bake all of that in or build all of that out in HubSpot or Salesforce or something, you need to leverage something that's already, like, it's built, it's ready for you. Like, it is absolutely ready for you to adopt and leverage. The responsive model, though, I don't think enough people get it. I think it's so much more important just thinking we want to be there and be proactive, not reactive. How can you be proactively encouraging generosity from your existing database, whether they're active funders or whether they're prospective funders? It's how do I reach them in meaningful ways that lead to gifts more often and more timely, more time bound? And how can you do it with a constrained team? Because everyone has constraints.
Yeah.
And so thinking like, how can we do more with less is really what we're trying to say.
Yeah, that's right. One of our customers recently said Virtuous helps them automate the menial so they can focus on the meaningful, right? So, which really, like, so much of our time is wasted just doing stuff that we don't really need to be doing, right? That could be automated, that can be done for us. And so much of it's just giving people time back in their day to do the things that they really want to do, which is have coffee with the donor, pick up the phone, do the handwritten note card, whatever, right? So, but, for me, so much of it is like, if you can understand like who somebody is and follow up quick. And so some of it's, these elegant multi-channel, hey, if somebody shows up at our event, we want these 4 touch points to happen immediately following without somebody on our team having to do it. But we want these 4 touch points over the first week. Here's the behavior, the next best step on for each person based on who they are, and so some of it's that more sophisticated, but some of it's like real obvious. I guess I'll post on LinkedIn this week. You may have seen the same thing, but somebody had given a decent sized gift out of their DAF, like months ago, and haven't heard anything from that organization. Like not a dang thing. I guarantee you it's because the gift came from a donor advised fund that wasn't connected to that person's donor account. And so the pass-through gift wasn't actively tracked. Nobody on their team got prompt to pick up the call or thank them. The, thank you letter probably went out eventually, but it probably went to the wrong address or post office box. It's just a mess, right? So sometimes it's not like the super sexy things. It's just like doing the basics well and expressing gratitude quickly and knowing who the people are, right?
But it's impossible without the data, right?
Yeah, it's impossible without the right data. Yeah.
Impossible. That's such a good use case, though. Just thinking, there's so many different ways people can give now, right? People are giving with stocks, they're giving with DAFs, they're giving crypto, they're giving online, they're giving with Apple Pay, Google Pay, all of these different platforms. And it's where's the source of truth? And I'm a firm believer it needs to be with your donor CRM when we're talking about fundraising. We have to have it.
Yeah. I'll put a plug in. We have this ebook. It's the responsive maturity model, but it's basically, I want to get to this like plateau of like AI driven automated fundraising that's optimizing around all of my metrics. And with my current team, I'm doing 100 times more. But the reality is there's like there's steps, so you can kind of benchmark yourself. And step one is like, is my data all in the same place and can I trust it? Right?
Right.
Is my data good enough? Do I have decent reporting on that data that's available to my whole team? And then can I segment my donors and divide people up by persona? And now you can get to, well, then now if I know that, maybe I could do a dynamic campaign. So instead of sending everybody the same direct mail appeal,
Right.
maybe I could mix it up by persona. And maybe I could time that based on their behavior. So not my timing, like we always send the thing in November, but their timing, right? Like, but you kind of have to have this maturity model of the steps you need to take to get to that promised land.
That's such a good example, though. I mean, just really thinking you can do it by persona, you can do it by program that they give to, you can give by when do they make their end of year gift might be very different. They might be a corporate partner where their book's closing, at a different time of year. And so just thinking there's so many ways you can customize it. But like when you zoom in and double down on the things that actually work, you end up with a very different revenue, like very different fundraising organization. Like it's not, again, it's not linear. Like this is not a linear return. It can be tremendous to be able to see it.
That's exactly right.
So when did you start building Virtuous?
We've been at it for about 10 years now. And so the 8 years before that at a software agency, we were building custom, mainly consumer-facing products, and we had a bunch of like for-profit customers like HBO and Cinemax, and we were doing work for Red Bull, but about half of our work was for big nonprofits, so like Compassion International and folks like that. And so that gave a lot of our team, coming from the agency space like the world you're in, just gives you a lot of pattern recognition, right? Because you just get to work with a bunch of different cool people solving really hard challenges. And so did that for a while and then founded Virtuous 10 years ago. And
it's awesome.
And it's been fun to see sort of some of the vision become a reality, right? It always costs more and takes longer than you think, but it's been so fun to look back and see, especially the organizations we serve that are just flourishing and doing great. And it's a ton of fun.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. But think about just 10 years. If we were just going to look at that snapshot, 10 years of helping professionalize organizations, because this conversation is around that professionalization of like, what does it look like to take the team to the next level? Let alone everything that you did before that with enterprise nonprofits. And so just knowing that the platform is built for organizations trying to grow, actively trying to grow and professionalize, that's why we're always happy to refer Virtuous out to other people that are in that position. It's like, hey, this is a path for you. Trust me. If you're wanting to make those moves, this is the platform for you.
Well, grateful for you. I can't argue with that, but
that's great. Gabe, this has been such a fun conversation. I'm so glad we got to have it.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. This is a ton of fun. I could go another hour on this. It's like such a great conversation.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to have all sorts of information. We want to have that responsive model. We have your book in there. We want to know where the responsive maturity is for organizations. Everything, all the resources that we talked about will be in the show notes on the standalone webpage for this episode. Is there any just parting words that you want to give just other organizations as they continue going down the path of creating social impact?
No. Well, I think this will probably launch after year end, but I hope year end went really well for you. But I mean, it really comes down to like, be brave and do the next right thing, right? And it's like, unsilo your data in teams, get your team geared around a number, learn to iterate and move fast, and just have the courage to do the next right thing. And you'll be amazed when you start stacking those wins, what happens.
Can't argue with that, man. Love it. Gabe, thanks so much for your time today. This has been a blast.
Yeah, thank you.